it is Ukrainian Pod TV. Sorry, it's Ukrainian show on Pod TV. It's rather this way. And my name is Sasha Star, and we have today Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
And we have also, I believe, Professor Adam Lamparella. Welcome to the show. Adam?
Whoop.
Oh, maybe he's not there yet.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's having difficulty with a transporter mechanism.
So you know what's happening? He may be delayed because every morning he's listening to Russian national anthem, and sometimes more than once. So if he decided to listen to it 5, maybe even 10 times,
until he gets himself in the proper mood. Okay.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, he doesn't feel well when he would miss even one morning without listening to Russian anthem. He's unwell all day and he's torturing himself or so on. So I hope he's okay.
Well, if he hears the latest news from the Russian-Ukrainian front, he's going to feel even less well. So
yeah,
I can't say he's going to get good news from there.
Actually, tell us what are the latest news from the front lines. Jonathan?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to hear from you if you're aware of the latest news from the front lines on Russian-Ukrainian front.
Okay, let's have it. No, I'm not.
Okay.
The up to the minute. No.
The problem is that the Russian advance actually halted completely. They cannot, before they would advance 50, maybe 100 meters a day by losing a couple of thousand people. It's not even there. I don't understand what's happening. They are continuous murderous terrorist attacks against Ukrainian civilians. That's going non-stop. And some people, including our friend Adam Lamparella, they believe that by signing the mineral deal, which happened yesterday, that would preclude the overall peace agreement. And what I don't understand is there are two separate deals. A peace with Russia, it's a peace between Ukraine and Russia. And the mineral deal is a deal between Ukraine and United States. Where is the connection? You can sign several deals with the United States and still not to have peace with Russia. Adam, are you aware that there are two different deals? It's not the same deal. There is a separate deal between Ukraine and United States, which is great. And yet there is a separate peace deal, which yet to be ever signed with Russia. It's not been signed, as there is no indication of anything that it will be signed. So, Adam, what are your comments about that?
Well, my first comment is you are correct. I did wake up to the Russian national anthem, and it was beautiful. I listen to it every morning.
Yeah, it's
my general point is this. This is a no-win situation for Russia. It's a no-win situation for Ukraine. Russia is not going to accomplish its objectives of taking over Ukraine, and Ukraine is not going to win this war. It has to stop. It's going to stop, and Ukraine's going to have to make concessions.
What kind of concessions? But it hasn't been defeated. Concessions have to make a side which has been defeated.
It's an unwinnable war for both sides, and
Trump is going to do. It's a winnable war for Ukraine. You will see now Trump is in play. Maybe, Jonathan, maybe he heard that.
Putin's goals cannot be achieved.
He did.
President.
Maybe that song we played last time actually got through to him. My goodness.
Oh, great.
You should pass it along to Adam when he has the chance.
Well, I would like you to tell me two scenarios. One scenario, there's no peace agreement. The second scenario, there is, where Ukraine gives up some territory. Russia agrees not to expand, which I think is ultimately going to be the result, because it's an unwinnable war for both sides. There's no end game. If we stick with the status quo, we're going to have more of the same. And I think ultimately Trump is going to get both sides to make choices that are not acceptable really to both of them, but in the big picture, necessary to preserve both countries. And explain to me why I'm wrong.
Well, let's see. Where shall I start?
You're the expert, and so I'm willing to be educated.
Only if you're willing to listen.
I'm listening.
Okay. First off, the reason that a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine is not at all likely is that both sides have politically irreconcilable objectives. It is clear the Russians are Putin is trying to reestablish the Russian Empire of a sorts, and in fact roll back NATO influence to, if he had his way, all the way back to pre-collapse of the Soviet Union. And then you have Ukraine, which absolutely does not want any part of Russia. They want Ukrainian sovereignty, and the history of relations between Russia and Ukraine, the hostility stretches back all the way, at least to the time of the Russian Revolution. And if you look at the atrocities that the Russians have historically perpetrated against the Ukrainians, the hostility runs even deeper. Plus, given the fact that at the end of World War II, the Ukrainians continued to resist Soviet army occupation in a guerrilla war, which lasted wasn't fully suppressed until 1954. So you have all that historical backdrop and historical memory, which the Ukrainians are very much aware of. And now you have a situation where the momentum of the Russian offensive has been decreasing steadily, and they have been losing momentum, and they're still taking high casualties. They've now crossed apparently the 1 million mark, which would make it easily the most expensive war for them since World War II. And you have also a situation where the thing that I've been arguing on a number of occasions over the past year or so is that the Ukrainians still have one key card that they can play, and that is they have the opportunity, very much like the Germans near the end of World War II had the opportunity by accumulating a strategic reserve as the Allies approached Germany, where the Germans were able to unleash a surprise counteroffensive in the Ardennes, and which, again, with better supplies, logistics, would have had a decent chance of succeeding, even though I would have argued they would have been better off throwing their counteroffensive against the Russians. In any case, the Ukrainians have been steadily building up their armed forces. They are at a larger point now than they have ever been since the start of the war. They also has significantly weakened the Kerch Bridge, which is the key logistical link between Crimea and Russia. And the Russians have been evacuating certain areas of Crimea. In anticipation, they apparently fear that there might be an offensive strike, which would, in my opinion, the goal for Ukraine in a surprise counteroffensive would be to isolate the Crimea from logistical and manpower reinforcement from Russia. Once that it is isolated, then Ukraine would be able to, with its strategic reserves that it has been able to mobilize up to this point, which, by the way, they would keep very close to the vest. They would not advertise their existence to the outside world. They would keep that, just like in stud poker, keep that whole card concealed until the moment that you need to play it. So at this point, they would unleash that surprise counteroffensive with the goal of isolating Crimea, forcing the Russian occupiers to surrender, and then the strategic reserves would be committed to retake the Crimea. That is what I've been contending, contrary to most Western analysts. I am one of the very few who even advocates or thinks that is possible. But if they execute that counteroffensive and retake the Crimea, then that would be an operational defeat for the Russian army and for Russia as a whole that they could not explain away. They would not be able to say, "Oh, we meant to do that." It would be an operational defeat that would put Ukraine in a much stronger position, if not to win the war outright, certainly put them in a much stronger position to negotiate an armistice, which is what I would contend is the most likely outcome at this point. An armistice, the best possible case for Ukraine at this point is an armistice, not a peace, because any peace which rewards Russia in any way for having started the war is not a peace treaty. That is appeasement, not peace.
I would like to remind.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You carry the ball for a while there. I got to recharge with coffee.
Well, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Since you're the expert, and I'm obviously not. The way that I see the situation as a non-expert is that from Russia.
You don't need to repeat it. Yeah, Sasha and I both know you're not an expert. Okay, just roll with it. I recommend you cast yourself in the role of an interested layperson.
That's right.
If you don't set yourself up. Well, I'm not an expert. Yes. Well, yeah, we can all see that. Don't set yourself up like that.
Okay. Well, then I'll ask
you are an interested layperson.
An interested layperson.
You're an interested layperson who wishes to know more.
So
that's simple.
In my view, from Russia's perspective, they cannot achieve their objectives. There is no possible way that they are going to be able to rebuild the empire that Putin wants. In fact, as you stated, there's a chance that they could suffer significant losses. From Ukraine's perspective, I don't believe that Ukraine can win this war or even make the progress that you're claiming it can. So I believe that from both sides' perspective, there's no incentive whatsoever to continue because it's going to lead to a protracted stalemate with neither party achieving any objectives. So therefore, there has to be some peace agreement. And what does that look like? Well, that's the challenge. But tell me why I'm wrong in what I'm assuming.
I'll tell you, Adam.
Okay. Yeah, your turn with the ball, Sasha.
Thanks. In a sec. Where you're wrong is, number one, that you're listening every morning to the Russian anthem. That already makes you somewhat unusual.
I do not share the same antipathy towards Russia that you two do, and I think it's much more morally and historically complex.
Okay, every day, country anthem of which you are listening to every day is killing innocent civilians, including children and women.
Yes, the U.S. has a
terrorist attacks, nothing else. And Russia is a terrorist state headed by terrorist Vladimir Putin. That's all there is to it. There is nothing really to qualify.
There's no incentive for them to continue this war.
This is not it's not an issue.
Sasha, keep carrying the ball. I got a book that I want to show Adam the copy of and a title of, which I think he will find very useful, which you can buy actually. It's not my book. You buy my book if you have trouble getting to sleep at night. Hold on a second.
Okay. So remember that for the last some years, Ukraine is defending their country against Russian forces. So it's not up to Ukraine to stop the war. Ukraine is incapable of stopping the war if Russian armies are keeping advancing.
I understand.
The only way to stop the war is for Russians to stop advancing. At that point, the war actually could be stopped.
But they're not advancing.
They cannot advance because Ukrainian forces made it incapable.
That's my point.
Of advancing. But Russia cannot stop the war.
Gentlemen,
okay. Thank you.
A book for both of you the Ukrainian and Russian notebooks, Life and Death Under Soviet Rule, by Igort, Igort.
Okay, I appreciate that. But I would like to answer my question when I say both sides cannot achieve their strategic. It is impossible. There is no incentive for them to continue.
And here's the interesting part. Okay, in the Russian language, the Russians up until the early 90s had no word for compromise. Now, when you think of compromise, when you hear the word compromise, it's when we say in the West or in America, let's compromise on this when we disagree about something. What do you think of when you think of the word, let's reach a compromise?
I
What does
think
that mean to you?
I think of making concessions that you would not otherwise want to make for a greater good or some progress in achieving the objective that is satisfactory to both parties.
Okay, okay. And the implication of what you've just said is that, another way that people put it is with compromise, meeting the other person halfway.
Correct.
Both sides, it's a more positive connotation in the West where both sides gain something of what they want. Now, when the Russians took our word compromise, transliterated it into Cyrillic, incorporated compromise, that word. But when they translated, the meaning that they gave to their word compromise is translated as mutual surrender. Both sides lose something,
Okay.
which to the Russians is very distasteful. Russians hate losing something like that. They don't like their leadership to compromise. So therefore, you see, therefore, when you view it through that prism, you see why the Russians continually take these maximalist positions, which amount to demanding unconditional surrender on the part of Ukraine and the West. Give us everything we want, essentially. No compromise. From their point, to compromise is to partially surrender, mutual surrender. That is why it's just a state. So that, by the way, is why one of the reasons why I wrote the book, The Russian View of U.S. Strategy. It is an outgrowth of my previous book, The Soviet View of U.S. Strategic Doctrine, in 1983, and originally started as my PhD dissertation, where by essentially looking at a problem that my professor, Dr. Leon Garay, told me had never been explored before. How do the Russians see us? How do the Russians see our strategy? What conclusions do they draw about it? How does it affect? Does it affect their use of military power and their foreign policy? And I discovered that, among other things, the Russians mirror imaged. Just like we mirror image. We projected our own thinking onto the Russians, assuming that they saw the situation the same way we did. We were wrong. They saw it differently. They projected their thinking onto our strategy, thinking that we were approaching the situation. So it was this mutual mirror imaging going on, both missing the point, but with different consequences for the arms race and for foreign policy in general. That mirror imaging tendency has continued into the post-Cold War period. The Russians have no self-correcting mechanism, which the United States intelligence community has to a certain degree, not entirely. We still tend to can fall victim to mirror imaging, but we have a self-correcting set of rules and tradecraft and review in the intelligence community, which can help us avoid that to as great an extent as possible.
Well, that's
my point is, the problem is that which you were obviously unaware of. Most people are unaware of it. Is that this tendency to project our own thinking, or their tendency to project theirs, they tend to essentially look past each other.
Yeah.
And this is where, and in their case, this is why mutual. Now, the Ukrainians and the Russians understand each other, and I put in quotes, understand better than we think. And they have a lot of historical experience with each other. The problem is the outside world does not entirely understand that dynamic. The Europeans do to a certain extent because they have the experience of the Cold War, and they have the experience of the former Warsaw Pact allies of the former Soviet Union. They are very much aware of what the Russians were like and are like. And they are the most concerned, by the way, about the possibility of the Russians actually winning in Ukraine or going on to take all of Ukraine. Because in their view, and view of many other European nations, Ukraine represents the eastern bulwark against further Russian expansion. And this is why, it's also, by the way, the reason why the European Union, an economic organization, has say that the sanctions on Russia will continue until and unless Russia completely withdraws from all of Ukraine, and that includes the Crimea. Now, the Russians aren't going to do that. Therefore, the European Union is going to continue its economic sanctions on Russia. And you have another dynamic coming in. Yeah, President Trump is saying that, if the Russians don't agree, we'll walk away from the peace agreement. And he's also talking about imposing economic sanctions of his own, tariffs, who knows what. And so you have this combination of factors. And the Soviets during the Cold War period used to speak of something called the correlation of forces. And they used to like to say the correlation of forces is continually moving in favor of socialism. And the reason they said that was because they regarded the triumph of socialism as historically inevitable. It's going to happen. Therefore, because we are currently not yet in favor of it reaching the triumph of socialism, therefore, by definition, the correlation of forces is continually moving in favor of socialism. Now, I would say during the Russian-Ukrainian war, the correlation of forces is moving continually in favor of Ukraine, because, as Clausewitz said, in the offense, when the attacker undertakes an offensive, eventually the attacker reaches what Clausewitz called the culminating point, the point at which they have exhausted their offensive. The attacker has exhausted his offensive potential. He can no longer advance, and the opportunity then arises for the defender to undertake a counterattack, which reverses the situation. That's how at least it works out in Clausewitzian theory. So we are seeing this playing out, this Clausewitzian model playing out in the Russian-Ukrainian war. The Russians are exhausting their potential. They are unwilling to compromise. They are unwilling to mutually surrender.
Well, okay, so then I have this question for you.
You may have peace by exhaustion, is what I'm saying.
That's what I'm kind of getting at. Like, I'm coming at this from basically a universal principle that I'm assuming that no rational human being, no rational person is going to act in a way that is antithetical to their self-interest or destructive to them. And I believe that principle applies to both countries. Russia is not going to achieve its objectives, and it's risking suffering severe losses. Ukraine is not going to achieve its objective of winning the war. So for both parties, doesn't it seem like the rational decision is coming to some compromise?
And Adam, guess what you're doing?
You're
applying the rational actor model. You are assuming that Ukraine and Russia are going to apply a Western rational actor.
That's correct.
To their thinking. You are in effect mirror imaging. That's why that you are mirror imaging. They are not rational actors in the sense that we understand them. There is a very visceral and emotional and nationalistic element to this, which throws all rational act. Yeah, the Ukrainians and Russians are not. They're not like they're playing a game of Risk. It's not like they're not saying, "Okay, I've taken enough losses. Time to call it a day. Let's stop rolling the dice and let's go have a beer."
That's where I'm going wrong.
Yeah,
I think you're both going wrong, assuming that
all right, let's get this food fight going. All right.
Okay. You are assuming that there is a possible truce, possible ceasefire or peace, or you can call it any other name, and both sides are stubbornly resisting it. But this is not true. Jonathan, Ukraine is not in control of a peace while being relentlessly attacked by Russians every day. It's only one-sided affair to have a ceasefire in Ukraine. It's a Russian side, period, full stop. Ukraine has nothing to do with that, because all they have to do is to defend their country against Russian attacks. And as long as there are Russian attacks, Ukraine can do nothing to achieve peace. What are you hell talking about?
Well, I agree with you from a moral perspective, but Jonathan, you've kind of enlightened me about the way that they think, which I didn't know. And I was using assumptions of rationality and self-interest that you've explained to me are not really applicable in the situation. So now that I know that, it does change the way that I think of it.
Well, and I would say with Sasha that as I've contended on previous programs, that Ukraine still has that opportunity, which most people tend to discount, the opportunity for a decisive counteroffensive at a moment of its choosing. That is their opportunity, Sasha. That is
Okay,
that's the piece that they can. That's the piece of the game that they can. That's still in their control.
Okay.
No one
Okay,
else expects.
Jonathan, so let's carefully analyze what you just said. In order to achieve peace, Ukraine must attack.
But
Just-
isn't peace isn't some type of peace agreement a certainty at some
There is
point?
no peace
It is a
agreement.
certainty.
Please, Adam, stop talking nonsense. There is no peace agreement. There is nothing.
This can't go on forever,
There is
Sasha. There's
nothing
going to be an
zero.
end to
There
this.
is a big fat zero. There is no peace agreement of
Right, but what I'm
any
saying is that aren't they at a point of exhaustion, like Jonathan was talking about? There
If Russia is
going to
being
end.
exhausted,
When do you
pull
say-
out, stop the terrorist attacks against Ukraine if you're exhausted. If you are not exhausted, you're going to be beaten on the front lines. There is no peace agreement of any kind right now to speak of.
Well, if Russia's going to be that
It's going to be
stupid,
different
then I
than
guess
we-
my entire assumptions were wrong.
Look, Russia has been stupid in the past. So I mean,
Well, you made a great point about missing each other, like the U.S. I get what you're saying. They're passing each other by because they don't understand how each other thinks, or we don't understand how they think. Is that correct?
well, for the most part, again, I'm one of the few that actually seriously analyze the Russian perception of our strategy and how they think. And there are many people in the West, although they get the idea that they obviously don't. We are not seeing eye to eye, but they don't understand the reasons behind that. And so that is where the difficulty comes in. But understanding each other does not mean that you're going to have peace.
Yeah.
You can understand each other and understand that this is going to be a long and brutal conflict.
Jonathan, there is something
All right,
else
that makes
in
sense.
play.
Thank you.
There is something else in play which affects Russia's ability to agree to a peace. Russia took upon itself the leadership of so-called you may call it, well, even
I just can't believe Putin would be that stupid.
yeah, he is.
Keep in mind, what kind of information is Putin getting? Where is he getting his information from? He is getting it from a very closed circle. He is getting his information through he's looking through a narrow keyhole, a set of blinders. Okay. He is not getting all these. And even if he were getting all sources, even if there were people who are going to offer him points of view contrary to what he is used to, that's no guarantee. Remember, Putin's mindset was and has been shaped by the experience of the Cold War. He came up through the KGB. The KGB has its own distinctly warped perception. I'll give you one quick example, and then we'll get back to our main discussion. During the Cold War, when President Reagan declared the Strategic Defense Initiative, in the book, and I'll even give you the book that you can go look up. The title is KGB, The Inside Story by Christopher Andrew and Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB defector. And in that book, I recall in the paperback edition, on page 607, how's that for memory? There was a phrase where in the paperback edition, they were talking about, Gordievsky was talking about how the KGB had sent a report to Gorbachev in April 1985 on Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. And in that report, the KGB stated that the SDI program would eventually be able to block 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike, and that there was no way that the Soviet Union could keep up with this capability. Now, I told my students, okay, all of you out there who believe that SDI is going to be able to block 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike, please raise your hand. And nobody did, because SDI was a research and development program, not an active deployment program. The Russians did not believe that. They believed that it was active deployment. And as a matter of fact, they interpreted the initial deployment of the Patriot system. You're familiar with Patriot. Yeah. They saw Patriot, when I was reading Russian military journals, there was one article interpreted Patriot as a anti-missile defense system intended for the defense of the United States. They saw it as the leading edge of Star Wars, of SDI. And they acted on this belief that SDI was eventually on track to do this, and the Soviet Union bankrupted itself to counter a phantom SDI program. So misperception can decisively affect courses of action and lead to and they can act stupidly, in effect. And matter of fact, one of the most difficult things to predict as an intelligence professional, when you are making predictions about potential enemy courses of action, is to predict when your enemy is about to do something stupid.
Makes sense.
But you always assume rationality. And Sasha, back to you.
Thank you. I'd like to remind that Russia is being helped a great deal of China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia is assuming, or was trying maybe to assume, rightly say so, especially with the missions of Vitkov to Moscow several occasions. So Russia was trying to assume a leadership of this group of countries which are all enemies of the United States, all enemies of democracy in our Western understanding, because there are some people who are saying that the Chinese model, it's a real democracy. It's where united the individuals and state, they are in harmony, and this is a perfect model for the future. Maybe Chinese future. I don't think Western future would be happy with this model, although I could be wrong.
So how does futility interact with exhaustion?
Hold on, Adam, please. Hold on.
Get this.
Prepare your question. So what's Putin now is being torn apart by continuing that his role of leadership, which it's not clear that China would agree to his leadership of any kind, but at least that's what he's trying to assume. And he's all kind of carrots that Vitkov threw at him for exploration of the Arctic and going some joint venture with Gazprom and all other wonderful things. So Putin is he was already treated as a traitor by China and North Korea. They're very hostile to his overtures with United States and so on. So he is now, I'm afraid, he will lose the war with Ukraine, and he will lose his leadership position in this so-called American front. Adam, back to you.
Is compromise considered more negative than losing? Putin has to understand he will not achieve what he intended to achieve. It is futile.
He is not compelled to understand anything. He is going to interpret events through his own intellectual prism, through the prism that he has been used to, that he has grown up with, that he's made his career with, and one writer has said, no man entirely escapes the assumptions of his age. None of us entirely are able to place ourselves outside of the prism of our own upbringing and our own environment.
Well, you know what this tells me? How sad this really is.
Oh yeah, well,
it shows me that stupidity is at the root of the loss of millions of lives.
Go read The Lord of the Rings. All I'd say is go read The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien asserted, because it's Christian mythology, but what Tolkien alone among the writers of his period, along with C.S. Lewis, asserted that we are all caught up in a lifelong struggle between good and evil, and the struggle between good and evil cannot be won during our lifetime or in this world. The struggle between good and evil goes on always, and evil is exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to eradicate by normal human beings. The best we can do is fight evil to a draw.
Do you think that part of this is almost like genetically or biologically determinative? Like there was no other choice for Putin. There's no other, he's not capable of thinking of anything else because that's how he's wired to behave. So it's inevitable
I would say I would not say genetic. Well, not say genetic. I would, speaking from my standpoint as a Christian, I would say spiritually, because we are all morally fallen. All of us are morally imperfect. None of us approach God's standard of moral perfection. That's why Christ had to die on the cross, in order to make that payment. That's Christianity in a nutshell. But in any case, what the implication of that is that the battle between the lifelong struggle between good forces and evil forces. Matter of fact, C.S. Lewis once stated, the devil's best trick is to get you to believe that he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And
Well said.
Tolkien also made that same point, is that evil is not just existing as a palpable force within the world. It exists within every person on earth. The struggle between good and evil, it goes on every day, not just between nations, not just between states, between individuals, but inside of each individual. The struggle between good and evil continues always. That is why achieving peace, in the sense that we would like to have it, is so next to impossible to achieve. And ironically enough, the ancient Romans said, if you want peace, prepare for war.
Actually, I would like to mention one more time that the achieving peace at this time is 100% in the Russian hands. There is nothing Ukraine can do to achieve peace. What, give you 40%? It's not enough.
They can increase the cost for Russia to continue. They can increase its cost, and they can punish Russia.
Isn't that why we won the Cold War?
Say what? Well,
we bankrupted them, didn't we? Didn't we outspend them?
Yeah, well, pretty much. The Ronald Reagan essentially did what Jimmy Carter did right after the invasion of Afghanistan, when Jimmy Carter's eyes were opened as to the true nature of the opponent he was facing. And among doing other things besides the boycotting the Olympics, the grain embargo, he began the defense buildup, which all Ronald Reagan had to do when he came into office was step on the accelerator and increase the defense spending. And basically, yes, you're right, outspend the Soviet Union and expand U.S. armed forces and opposition on all other fronts, to the point where in accordance with George Kennan's containment grand strategy, which you had adopted, if we could keep the Soviet Union from expanding or gaining through ideological subversion or military conquest, if we could just keep them from expanding, then inevitably the Soviet Union would buckle under the stresses of its own internal contradictions. Mm-hmm. History proved George Kennan right, that basically keep them from expanding, and just like the shark, the shark, when it is born, it has to continually keep moving forward, because guess what happens if the shark stops moving? It sinks and dies. So a shark must be moving forward its entire life. Russia must be attempting to expand it must expand or die.
According to different Russian economists, Dr. Alexashenko and many others, even Illarionov, they come to the conclusion that Russia can still last economically probably during the next few months, maybe by the end of the year, by beginning of 2026, they will be completely exhausted. They will not be able to have any ammunition or weapons being made there. They will be completely supported by North Koreans and China, Iran, if they're willing to continue to do so, because they may get...
When you consider those pillars, Sasha, those are some mighty weak pillars for Russia to be standing on. It's just not promising, either in terms of manpower or in terms of meaningful economic support. And if President Trump continues on his track with producing more energy, dropping the price of oil, which is what Russia depends upon for its revenue, that is indirectly putting even more pressure on Russia. So,
But you see, I think
so
Russia lost its momentum to agree with Donald Trump's proposals, because now I think sort of the time is no longer on the Putin side. He thought to prolong these negotiations and going into next month and maybe in next 3 months or so on. And momentum is now being shifted away from Putin. I think Trump is getting more and more annoyed by his disability.
because Putin is not acting according to his desired paradigm.
Right.
Trump believes, okay, to a certain degree, that it is possible to make a deal with everyone. And if you want an amusing example of the truth of this, based on President Trump's background from New York, if you ever watch the movie Kelly's Heroes, watch the movie Kelly's Heroes, in which Don Rickles, the comedian, he was one of the actors in that movie, and Clint Eastwood. They were both actors in that particular movie. And at one point, they are confronting a German SS trooper in a tank who's occupying the town, guarding the gold that they are after. And so Rickles asks Eastwood, says, well, so how are we going to get past that tank? Make a deal. He says, Rickles says, make a deal with him. So Eastwood says, a deal? He says, a deal. He wants, essentially that he likes gold. Once they told him that there was a lot of gold in that bank, then the German was willing to turn around and blow a hole in the door.
So, it's funny because I'll give you a short example of how I used to view the situation. In academia, for example, let's assume that I have a student who has engaged in very serious misconduct and a pattern of disrespect towards other students and myself. But someone in the administration says, listen, this student, their parents are donors to the university, so you're going to overlook this and you're going to give the student an A. And what do? Well, I give the student an A. You want to know why? Because all the principles I have, all the morals I have, if I followed them, I would be terminated. So my point is, I'm doing something that I absolutely hate, that makes me sick, but that is in my self-preservative instincts. Does Russia not understand that?
Yeah, go ahead. I've been a college professor myself, both online as well as for the Joint Military Intelligence College, now the National Intelligence University. And at the National Intelligence University, because I was a government professor, I had a lot more backing, and I was regarded as one of the toughest professors in the university. And this one student on active duty, and he failed to turn in his final exam on time.
Right.
And what I did is I posted the grades, gave him an F, and I posted the grades. And he was in a panic, because the rest of the said, Dr. Lockwood gave this student an F. My God. And the student came to me really fast. And I said, I told him, you have until this Friday to turn in your final exam. I will grade it. And then if I believe you have, I will issue a change of grade. And, because if he knew that if I did not, he would get a failing grade, he would be kicked out of the program. And because he was an intelligence officer, his career would be over.
Right.
He complied. Now, and then on the other side, in the more private sector, when I was an online university teaching, again, I had the reputation of being the toughest professor in the university. And what I use the grading system as you have to maintain a B average, right, in order to graduate. A's I did not give very many of at all. Just so that you get an A in my class, you earned it. I used, because occasionally I would give a student a B minus, which is below what they are supposed to be earning. It's a warning. It says, I'm passing you just barely, but watch it. And you could get no more than 2 C's in the program and still graduate. But you had to be able to make up those C's by getting A's in 2 other courses in order to bring yourself up to the required B average. Mm-hmm. So I use the grading system, as the carrot and stick. Yeah. So there are ways to do it. There are ways to enforce discipline and ways to show. And the students got the message. And so therefore they would put out their best effort. And basically, if you get an A from me, cherish it. You earned it.
Okay.
And so there are you have to be able to understand the nature of the system in which you are operating. Now, in that particular system, where I would be so vulnerable to, rich students with rich parents, no. I would never I would never put myself in that kind of a moral dilemma to start with.
That's a good point.
So, but I understand the moral dilemmas that can arise.
Yeah.
Now, in any case, back to our original focus. Where were we, Sasha? Ukraine. Yeah, there we go.
Well, I would love to keep talking, but I actually have a meeting with a student about her final exam.
Okay. Good luck.
Oh, about her final exam. Okay, very good. Well, eventually, I'm going to take my wife out to dinner.
This has been a great discussion, though, very enlightening, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to.
Thank you so much, and we'll have next discussion next week, Adam. Hopefully, you will join. Please get a little bit more experience and knowledge in the material, and collect some useful questions, and we will be glad to answer, or maybe you will answer.
That's one suggested reading. Yeah. Like
I say, will our next show so I can have more of a knowledge base.
Usually, we'll have a lot of fun, and hopefully, we'll have more great news. So far, I'm prepared to great news about Ukraine. Yesterday was a great act of signing that deal. Mind you, Jonathan, you remember how much I was against it, but now it's been changed considerably. There was
they are learning
things.
The Ukrainians are learning the art of the deal.
Okay, art of the deal.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Bye bye, everybody. Glory to
America.
Bye bye.